Hello, Kansas classmates. With this assignment, I'm going to dive into state aid in Indiana. Some slight differences in some of these compared to Kansas, which was really interesting for me because it allowed me to kind of dig in on how Kansas does some things and how in Indiana we do some things to end up with school funding. So here are the numbers for Warsaw Community Schools. I include our school number. I see in a lot of these classes at Kansas, it's automatic after you state the school to include that number. In Indiana, we just don't. I'm not sure why there's that difference. Our assessed valuation is $2.5 billion. I'm not sure how that compares with most people. The town we live in is actually fairly small. We have a robust industry, and some of that industry might help with that evaluation. Our total cash balance on hand is almost $36 million. Our general state aid that we get from the state is almost $62 million. Our total expenditures are almost $86 million. Our students, which are really important for our school funding in Indiana, because we get money for each one of those. In Indiana, we do counts twice a year, one in the fall and one in the spring. Right now, we have 6,797 students. Warsaw is typically around 7,000 total students. That number's dipped a little bit, mostly because of the pandemic, because we saw a bigger increase of students going to the homeschool route. But we should see that number up close to 7,000 next year, which will be great for our budget. Free and reduced, not quite half of our students are free and reduced, really close to 3,000. It's about 41 to 42% each year. It just really depends. Kindergarten format, we are all day. I think Indiana still allows you to choose half day or full day, depending on funding. I'm not quite sure with the funding with half day kindergarten how that all works out, but at Warsaw, we're all day funding. So I know there's some unique funding things with kindergarten in Indiana. Specifically, if you have your kids go through kindergarten twice, I'm not quite sure you get funding for both of those times. It depends on kindergarten birth dates as well. So there's a cutoff there for Indiana. I believe it's October 1st. So if you have them come in earlier than that birth date, you don't get funding for that student, which can frustrate some of our parents with really smart young 5-year-olds because we don't let them join. Meal pricing for students. Lunch, it's $2.35. Breakfast, it's $1.25. This is one of my sticking points, mostly for adults because it is a little bit higher. Adult lunch, it's $3.50, and for breakfast, it's $2.10. I always thought, since I was an employee of the school, that should be one of the benefits, to have free lunch and free breakfast. You can't beat a school hot dog every Friday, and that school pizza is great. But unfortunately, I have to pay. I think I have a negative balance right now in the cafeteria. I'm sure I'll pay that here soon because they're always on my case. Here's the biggest difference for this assignment between Indiana and Kansas. In Kansas, you use the term mill rates. We just talk about it as a tax rate. And the difference really is a mill rate is by $1,000 of assessed valuation, where tax rates, it's $100. So I had a comparison of Emporia versus Warsaw. So you can see kind of how it's different. I do have some questions because I'm not quite sure overall how this is different or not. But Emporia, your general rate was 20. I also noticed on that spreadsheet that every school in Kansas was 20. So I'd be kind of interested if somebody has some comments with some discussions afterwards to kind of explain why that's 20 for everybody. And I'm going to assume the supplemental is where you see differences in the school funding, because on that sheet, a lot of people had different numbers. Capital outlay was 8 for Emporia. I also saw that most of them were capped, I think, at 8, and some of them were slightly below that. So I'd be interested to learn a little bit about that as well. Bond and interest was at 12.392 for a total of 53.545. If you would convert that into a tax rate, you would just move the decimal point, I think, over to the left one. So it would be like a 5.35. Which is interesting because our tax rate, when we add up all of them, is 0.92. So I'm not quite sure how that mill rate, if you move the decimal place over 1, because it's all based on assessed valuation versus a tax rate for Indiana, is different, and how that deals with funding per school. So I guess for me, the comparison of total funding is what really interests me. For Warsaw, our operations tax rate, which I think would be similar to your general and supplemental tax rate, is or mill rate is 0.4519. Our debt service is 0.3761. I think that's very similar to your bond and interest mill rate. The debt service, that's the money that we get from our assessed evaluations to pay off our debt and principals on some of our bonds. Referendum debt. I'm not sure how Kansas does this, but we are allowed to run a referendum as long as it's voted upon for increased funding. That does increase our tax rate. Warsaw recently ran a referendum a couple years ago, so you can see how that has increased our tax rate. It's actually a big deal in Indiana. We were able to pass with like a 60% vote rate. We use that referendum dollars to do some facilities projects. There are some other districts in Indiana that use a referendum for operational costs and teacher salaries. Most of those come from your Indianapolis schools on the fringes that have some really high tax rates, some really great looking schools, and those parents that are willing to invest that way. So it's a unique thing for Indiana. I'm not sure that Kansas has that or not. One of our local school districts that's neighboring to us ran a referendum. It failed, and then the superintendent was relieved of his duties at Christmas time. So it's a pretty big deal. So if you add up all of these, our total tax rate is 0.92. That's not bad when you compare it to the surrounding areas. I know most of our surrounding areas are in the 1.1, the 1.3 area. And that can be a source of contention and makes it kind of difficult to do any kind of building projects based on that. We really try to get that debt service down as much as possible because that lowers the tax rate, which makes the people happy. I hope I didn't mess any of that up. If somebody knows anything different, please let me know. I still consider myself a big newbie on understanding the difference between mill rates and tax rates, and I'm still a little fuzzy, so maybe somebody can help me out in the discussions afterwards. Personnel distribution, we have one superintendent. His salary is $175,000 plus benefits. We have 13 principals because we have 13 buildings. Their average salaries are $93,000 plus benefits. We almost have 500 certified teachers, most of them coming from the high school. You can see the average salary is almost $47,000. I know that we have a big push to have our first-year teacher salary be at $40,000 starting off. I know Indiana is actually at the bottom for teacher salary and beginning salary compared to other states in the nation. Our non-certified, we have about 700 non-certified hourly salary individuals, which puts us close to like almost 1,500 people employed for Warsaw Community Schools, which makes us the fourth or fifth largest employer for our county. I'm not sure how that compares to some of the counties out in Kansas or in other counties in Indiana, but it is nice to be able to have a big community support in our local schools. I hope this helps everybody, maybe generate some questions and some really good discussions about the difference between Indiana and Kansas. I really look forward to those discussions and feedback that you can provide me. I hope everybody's having a great weekend. It's still hot and muggy here. Humidity's high. The lake that I live on has tons of pond scum, so I can't really cool off there, so I'm pretty bummed about that. Talk to you guys later. See ya.